Welcome back to Heightscast, the podcast of the Heights School. This is Rich Moss with you from the campus of the Heights in Potomac, Maryland. We're here to talk about the education and the formation of young men fully alive in the liberal arts tradition. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for continuing to share us, our mission, and our vision of education with your friends. We are most grateful. Today, we welcome to Heightscast Dr. Christopher J. Scalia, former English professor, now senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute in D.C., where he focuses on literature, culture, and higher education. He is co-editor of 2 books on faith, Lessons from an American Believer, and Scalia Speaks, Reflections on Law, Faith, and Life Well Lived. Last month, so this is hot off the press, is in May with Regnery Publishing. He published his own book, his own debut book, 13 novels conservatives will love and probably haven't read. So a wonderful commenter on all things cultural, both old and new. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much. It's great to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. So we'll be talking about this book that is literally hot off the presses. 13 novels conservatives will love, and in parentheses, but probably haven't read. And so I think with so many really interesting books, oftentimes there's a story behind the initial authoring of the book. So what brought this project into focus for you? What's the story behind it?
Well, the premise is that if you talk to people right of center politically, if you talk to them about fiction, they tend to say that their favorite novels are the same handful of novels. So if you're speaking to a libertarian, it's something by Ayn Rand, like, Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged. If you're speaking to a Heights parent, it's Brideshead Revisited or The Moviegoer by Walker Percy and Evelyn Waugh. Or Bonfire of the Vanities by Tom Wolfe. Those are 1984 by George Orwell, et cetera. There's a handful of kind of old, reliable novels in there. Those are just the English language original ones. I haven't mentioned like Dostoevsky, for example. And for the most part, I think those are great novels. And the purpose of the book is not to shake people and say, stop reading those novels. They're not any good. But the problem is, as I see it, is that conservatives are in a little bit of a rut. That is, they don't recognize the great literary tradition at their disposal. They don't recognize just how many novels are addressing themes and presenting values that are especially amenable to conservatives. And my thinking is that ignoring that tradition isn't a very conservative thing to do. So instead of, I'm not trying to replace the novels that they like now, but if they are tired of talking about those novels or they just want something fresh, I'm directing them toward another baker's dozen's worth of novels.
Awesome. And
I go from the 18th century, mid-18th century to the present day.
It's awesome. We're lovers of the novel here.
Yeah.
And it's funny, oftentimes I'm asked for recommendations, for better, for worse, of good parenting books. And as someone who's trying to figure it out myself, still it's a good opportunity to think about these things. But sometimes I can't help but recommend a good novel as some of the best parenting books.
Yeah, it's funny. One of the things I discuss in my introduction is that I think especially nowadays we developed more and more of an emphasis on the fact that, or the belief that truth and knowledge can only be arrived at through data, and history, and real life facts and events, and those are no doubt avenues towards truth, wisdom, knowledge. But when we overlook fiction, when we overlook the arts in general, we're ignoring wonderful resources of wisdom and knowledge. And the case for the novel in particular, it's not an old art form. It's really only, quote unquote, a few centuries old, which is, by artistic standards, pretty new. But some of the greatest minds of Western civilization applied their art and their craft and their ideas to the novel. So it's something that we really need to be aware of if we want to understand, I don't know, the human condition as it's been represented over the past few centuries. And to your point about parenting in particular, it's funny, as I was writing my book, the first 3 novels I write about are all really about young men or women entering the real world and learning from their mistakes. So the first is Miraculous, by a novel. Well, it's not really a novel; it's an Oriental tale. But I figured nobody would ask for a refund based on that slight liberty. 1759 work by Samuel Johnson about a young man's desire to leave this very sheltered life he leads, sheltered and pampered, and go into the real world and find out the truth about human nature and the disappointing things he learns along the way, as well as kind of the encouraging lessons he learns about ambition and goals. And then the second novel I look at is Evelina by Frances Burney from the late 18th century. And that's more, it's a female perspective, a young woman entering the real world, and kind of the classic, I'm reluctant to call it a rom-com, but that's the best point of comparison for today. Courtship novel is what they would have called it, about what to look for, how to avoid dangers in the real world, how to think for yourself. And of course, there's a love plot where this is a lot of that novel in particular for young men. It's about how young men should act, and when pranks cross the line, and when a forceful, virtuous young man needs to intercede and tell other people how to behave, and where they cross the line. And then the last of these novels I look at, the kind of the first trio of coming of age novels, is Waverly by Walter Scott, which is about the title character he's vulnerable, he's manipulable when he enters the army and then is persuaded to join a rebellion against the British kingdom, the British monarchy, because he has received a bad education. His tutors, his parents, his educators failed to guide his reading, and because of that, he read things that made him easily manipulated, easily misled, and really affected his decisions in life. So all 3 of those novels are, I think, perfect for young people and for parents guiding young people to recognize the importance of kind of those adolescence and early adulthood years in shaping the rest of one's life.
It's awesome. And it strikes me as you're sharing these things that all of them are super, quote unquote, practical. So I think sometimes the liberal arts is sort of seen as like, well, it's not practical, and this is practical. These are good things.
It's practical, but Horace said that art should instruct and delight, and that's what these novels do. And I recommend them first and foremost, not because they're practical or because they present conservative lessons. Those are reasons why. But more than anything, these are great novels. They are of outstanding literary merit, and no matter your political or ideological inclinations, you are likely to enjoy most of these novels. I don't know if anybody's going to love all of them, apart from me, but 12 out of 13 wouldn't be bad. Yeah. Because, and I say that because, again, these are by some of the greatest novelists and writers in the Western tradition, really writing in English literature. So that's, I think anytime you reduce a novel to the lessons it teaches, you're sliding into propaganda. A great work of art needs to recognize complexities, ambiguities, and even still then have something approaching a moral without hitting you over the head with it. And that's what makes it enjoyable.
Absolutely. And I think in some respects that's what makes it a great teacher.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. And so you mentioned some of ideology and things of that nature. In the title, it's 13 novels conservatives will love. And I'd love to double click on the question of conservatives and what that means, because I think it's one of these terms with a deep tradition, deep history, sort of like the whole question of the liberal arts. Yet two people can use the term and be talking about completely different things in some respects. And especially these days when, politically speaking,
what it means to be conservatism has been, changed so much over the last 10 years because of the way the Republican Party has changed. So I try, when I'm defining conservative here, I mean it by, I'm defining conservatism based on some principles that have been pretty constant, in some cases for centuries, and in some cases for maybe just half a century or a little more than that. For example, a belief in an enduring human nature that transcends place and time. That's a very conservative belief that has very clear political implications, but in and of itself is not necessarily political. And I focus on that in a couple of novels, but especially Miraculous, the one I mentioned earlier by Samuel Johnson, and connect Johnson's beliefs in transcendent human nature to how the founders wrote about human nature, and the American founding fathers, obviously. And Johnson was not a fan of the American Revolution, but he, because they were both products of the Enlightenment and kind of producers of the Enlightenment, they did share some philosophical beliefs about what it means to be human and what principles, values, and passions endure over time and place. So that was one principle. A lot of these novels look at the danger of sudden, drastic change and revolution at the as opposed to gradual change and bottom-up reform. And Waverly is the best example of that, but another one is The Blithedale Romance by Nathaniel Hawthorne, which is a pretty funny novel about the narrator's failed efforts to be part of an agrarian commune, and it's based on Hawthorne's own experience. And the character, his name is Miles Coverdale, realizes that he went into this effort to thinking he could change the human condition because he and his peers understood human nature better than anybody had before. And they were, from their modest farm, going to initiate a revolution. But the project collapses for a variety of reasons. And in retrospect, Coverdale realizes that they were foolish to believe that everybody who had preceded them were ignorant fools, and they had everything figured out, when all they had were abstract ideas that had never been tested anywhere. So that's a very conservative idea. Again, you're not going to hear many politicians talk about that idea on the campaign trail, but it's traditionally, at least since Burke, been understood as a central principle of conservatism. I also write about, one novel I write about is My Ántonia by Willa Cather, which is about basically what we would call the American dream and what it means for both native-born Americans as well as immigrants, and how that dream and those opportunities are available for, I don't want to say everybody, but they're available to the people willing to work for them. And it's certainly not easy. It entails sacrifice and loss, but it can still be realized. So I try to touch on a different key conservative concept in every novel. There's overlap between the novels, but that was kind of unavoidable. But every novel, I think, emphasizes, or in my discussion of every novel, I try to emphasize a different principle. Some of these principles are going to be embraced by people of the left too. I don't think, I think there will be points of agreement between liberals and conservatives in some of what I have to say here.
It's awesome. That's great. Yeah, because I think I love how you framed it up. There's certain basic principles that are worth conserving and passing on, and to the extent that you want to change our tradition and our tradition's attempts to embody these principles, you should act prudently,
right?
Very
absolutely.
carefully.
And that shouldn't be confused with something like conservatives don't believe in progress. We do, but it's a more gradual form of progress, and it would emphasize different elements than a liberal or progressive view of progress.
Right. No, it's so interesting, and I should obviously comment that this is a nonpartisan podcast affiliated with a nonpartisan school, but I do think that in these principles that you're sharing, I think if folks can come at them with a fresh look, you'll find, gosh, probably have more in common with
Yeah.
with folks who are voting differently or believing differently than we might realize.
I also hope that if you're not conservative, you would get something from this novel or from this book, because A, you would learn a lot about great novels, and B, you will learn about principles of conservatism, at least as manifest in these novels. And along the way, I discuss and quote a lot of conservative thinkers like Russell Kirk, William F. Buckley, Michael Oakeshott, Edmund Burke, Gertrude Himmelfarb, people who have kind of helped shape what it means to be conservative over the last couple hundred years.
It's awesome. Yes, I mean, what a cool. I mean, to be introduced to these principles and then to step into a work having a better understanding of what the authors took to be sort of foundational aspects of the human experience,
right,
probably deepens your understanding of the book. And maybe it is kind of I think it's front and center for many of us, at least inside the Beltway and across the country, really, this question of the American dream, that's wrapped up with certain policy questions right now. But can we go? We can't do this for all the books. Sadly, I wish we could, but we can't. But at least within that context of My Ántonia and the American dream, how does that particular novel help us understand that very hard to define idea?
Well, if I'm going to try to offer a description, it would be, I guess, kind of a variation of what I was describing earlier. The American dream is the belief that people born in low conditions can work their way up to prosperity and happiness. And we see that in My Ántonia in two characters. One is the narrator, Jim Burden, and the second is the title character, Ántonia. She is an immigrant from Bohemia. The novel is set in the late 19th century and mostly in Nebraska. And he, Jim Burden, is an orphan, born and spends his early years in Virginia and then moves to Nebraska. And he's telling the story about growing up in Nebraska and especially the immigrant community around him and these immigrant girls from Bohemia. And My Ántonia is the one who fascinates him the most. So he describes the prejudice and stress and difficulties that the immigrants have to overcome. And he doesn't suggest that all of them were successful. And in fact, Antonia's father suffers an especially tragic fate that I won't give away here. So it's clear that the immigrant experience is difficult. But ultimately, the novel celebrates what immigrants contribute to the United States through a handful of characters, including Ántonia, who overcomes a lot of difficulties and bad decisions to start a big family. And one of my favorite things about this novel is how her very large family is depicted at the end. Coming from a large family myself, that those pages especially rang true to me. And then, but she works on a farm with her husband and her large family. But two of her peers, other young women, venture out on their own and find success in business and I think journalism. So Ántonia it's a celebration of kind of this maternal life and of big families, but Cather is also making clear that that's not the only way to find success in the United States. Cather herself didn't have a family, but it's remarkable that she celebrates Antonia's choice to do that and celebrates that large family. And Jim Burden, on the other hand, the narrator, he overcomes that difficult upbringing or the loss of his parents. He too finds success in the United States as he gets a degree from University of Nebraska, then goes to Harvard, studies classics, and then becomes a lawyer. And as a lawyer for the railroads, helps develop the West. And it's clear, we are told at one point that one reason he's so good at this job is because he loves the country. And he loves the land of the United States, so he helps develop it. And that's really a profound message. He's not developing just for the sake of developing. He's developing, kind of making the nation more of what it already was. And there are a couple of passages that hint at that. And so they both find success in very different areas of life. I think Antonia's family life is ultimately more is ultimately happier than Jim's, but Jim definitely still finds success in his own right.
It's awesome. Yeah, I love the beginning of that novel and just kind of how it's been a while. So this is reaching deep into the archives, but doesn't the author kind of ask Jim to share his recollections?
The novel begins with kind of an italicized description where somebody who is some version of Willa Cather describing and bumping into Jim Burton on a train and describing him and memories of him, and then the rest is Jim's reflections of it's through Jim's voice rather than Cather's voice. But yeah, it's there are very strong nostalgic elements to the novel, but it somehow never gets saccharine or treacly. And as I said, it acknowledges some of the difficulties of the immigrant experience and just of what it takes to achieve success. But there are also just beautiful descriptions of the American landscape. There's one scene in particular I write a little bit about in my book, 13 Novels Conservatives Will Love. Jim and Ántonia and a couple of their friends are out in the fields around sunset. The sun begins setting, and there's a plow on the horizon, and the sun basically, I think he even uses the word transfigures the plow, and it looks eternal and unearthly for a moment in that sunset, but then it's only a moment, and it becomes its normal self again. And critics have identified that passage as particularly important because it's Cather. Cather was really influenced by Virgil in particular, and she loved bringing in celebrations of the pastoral. And she tried to weave together specifically American themes, but then themes and techniques of classic literature as well. And that scene in particular is a particularly memorable example of that.
I'm going to dust it off and take another read, which I think is probably a lot of the point of this whole project, which is beautiful. And then the last book I'll ask about, because I'm a huge fan of it, is Peace Like a River.
Oh, good.
Tell me what. That's an amazing book. I'd love to hear what pulled it into this wonderful list.
Not many people have read this novel. It's a 2001 novel by Lee Fenger, and a couple of my siblings and a friend or two had been telling me to read that since 2001, and I didn't get around to it until I was working on this book. And after I read it, I just kicked myself for not reading it 20 years ago because it was so good. As I said, it's probably the least known of the works I include in this collection, but I've never met anybody who's read it who didn't love it. This is a novel set in the 1960s in the Midwest, about a family who's it's a father and 2 boys and a daughter. The oldest brother commits a crime and is hunted, becomes a fugitive. He's on the lam. He goes out west, and his family tries to find him before the feds do. And so, in some ways, it's kind of a classic Western because it's a road trip where this family's trying to get there, trying to beat the law and get their brother, and a lot of it is set in very rural, a very rural setting. I think some of the key passages are in the Badlands, but it also brings in this element of literature, this literary fiction subgenre called magical realism. And in magical realist novels, fantastic things happen in the everyday, and people don't really bat an eyelash. And a version of that in this novel, I call it miraculous realism, because the father of this family can perform miracles. At least the narrator, who's his younger son, is convinced he can. So we witness we are told about a handful of miracles over the course of the novel. So it's an unusual work because it's kind of an outlaw novel, a family novel, but it's also a novel that forces Christians to consider seriously what they would do if they witnessed miracles, if they witnessed somebody they knew performing miracles. Would they think they were crazy? Would they believe? Would it confirm their faith? How would they react? Because it's one thing to hear that somebody in another country did has a stigmata, something like that. But what if it's a member of your own family that you see levitate or you see heal somebody else? It really asks profound questions of faith, even as it's a really exciting kind of neo-Western miraculous realist novel. And that was, again, it's published in 2001. I include a couple of novels from the 21st century because I think it's important for people to recognize that there is still a lot of great literature being written out there that is worth engaging with. It's not, not everything confirms our worst suspicions about about modern artists. One more thing about Peace Like a River.
Please.
It's also a fascinating novel because it is, especially for young men, because it features three characters who represent different, might call, modes or versions of masculine behavior. One is the oldest son who has justice on his side, but lacks all mercy and is just irrational in a way. And then there's another just sinister character we meet very late in the novel who is just aggressive, evil masculinity. He abuses women. He has no regard for anybody else's life. And he sees himself as, he rejects God. When one character says grace before a meal with this evil character, the evil character scolds him and says, "Do you think God, I need God's blessing or approval for what I'm giving you," or something like that. So he has a sense that he is above God and is himself a higher being. And then there's the father character, the one who performs miracles, who is, not surprisingly, Christ-like. He is a wonderful father. He's committed to his children, even though he's raising them alone. He has given up a lucrative career, or he's given up an ambitious career so he could be a better father and live a life that better suits the miracles he understands he's performing or the religious awakening he's had. But he is not above taking violent and swift action when necessary to protect helpless, defenseless, and weaker people. And there's a really important scene where he does just that. So we get these in the novel. We get these three versions of masculinity, and I think one is clearly the one we're supposed to recognize as truly good. Another we're supposed to recognize as truly evil, and another one somewhere in between that we probably worry is very attractive to us, but we know is the more dangerous one, is still a dangerous one we should avoid.
Yeah, the evil character is so very evil.
Yes, he really is
such an evil. I mean, it's like in a way beautifully evil, insofar as it just really captures so much of all of that.
Well, and I think I have a couple of novels in my collection that I wrote about in large part because they acknowledge the existence of evil. Evil is a real thing that can't be explained away by just societal conventions or things like that. There are certain things that are so unacceptable. There are some people who are just have such a distorted sense of their place in the world that they can commit atrocious wrongs. And Peace Like a River is one of them. Another one I write about, I don't know what Leif Engers, the author of Peace Like a River, is. I don't know what his politics are. I don't know what his religion is. But this is what I get from the novel. Another novel I include that touches on some of the same issues is The Girls of Slender Means by Muriel Spark. Muriel Spark was a Catholic convert and started writing fiction after she converted to Catholicism, and especially in her early novels, she loves exploring the nature of evil. And The Girls of Slender Means is in large part about the presence of evil and how the recognition of evil can lead us towards God, kind of not because we want to push back against that evil. The main character, or one of the main characters of that novel, a young when most of the novel is set, his name is Nicholas. He's just an aimless poet, atheist, who witnesses a couple of things in the waning days of World War II in London, and they rattle his understanding of human nature and human behavior so much that he eventually converts to Catholicism, becomes a priest, and we learn is martyred in Haiti. So intense was his recognition of the presence of evil and the need to convert people against it that he gave up his own life.
It's amazing. Which again, it's to go back to Peace Like a River, because it's interesting. In some cases, you confront evil. I mean, so much of it's a question of vocation and like God, where do you want me? Some people confront the evil and go off to be the missionary. Yeah. And then you've got this other character in Peace Like a River who just confronts the evil, takes care of business, but remains committed to his children and being a janitor and just doing what has to be done in the ordinary. It's really beautiful. So all these different ways of getting to these fundamental questions. It's fascinating. How was it? So I really, really appreciated earlier on in our conversation where you shared that it's important not to make novels overly practical, in the sense that you rob the art of its beauty, of its mystery, and you have to kind of confront the novel on its own terms. Was it a challenge? Because why the reason I appreciate that, because it seems to me that makes you a great guide through these novels, because you're guiding us in a way that is still respectful of the mystery. You're not just trying to like, okay, Peace Like a River, 5 bullet points you got to know, and then moving on, right? Yeah. But was that a challenge to write about these books in a way that still preserved the mystery of the encounter?
It was. Well, for one thing, I didn't want to spoil too many endings, so I had to be pretty vague in some of my descriptions, because I want readers to go on to read the novels if they haven't already. I think great novels are open to multiple interpretations, not infinite interpretations. It is possible to get a novel totally wrong. But even the novels I write about, for example, Waverly, most people understand that novel as a warning against violent uprisings, no matter how well it, no matter how just the foundations in some regards, to overthrow a government because of that had been established for a generation because of basically unforeseen consequences. But there are those who argue that Walter Scott was trying to say the opposite, that in fact this revolution was justified, and I don't buy the argument, but it's there are some compelling arguments in that in favor of that. And similarly, one novel I write about, Their Eyes Were Watching God by Willa Cather, that's kind of a rediscovered novel. People of a certain age, people over 50 don't know this novel at all. People under 40 had to read it in high school or college. It's a very frequently assigned novel now. When it was first, it was published in the late 1930s, but kind of disappeared and was resuscitated in the late 1970s. And for much of its renaissance, it's been understood as a black feminist novel. And there are good reasons to believe that. But I push back against some of those arguments and suggest that it's a little bit more complicated than that. And I focus on other elements of the novel that are, I think, more aligned with conservative thought and conservative thinking, because the author, Zora Neale Hurston, was herself very conservative. So a novel like that is open to multiple interpretations, reasonable interpretations. I happen to think mine are right, but in the case with novels or plays, I mean, Shakespeare is probably the best example of this. Great works endure in part because they can be ambiguous without being obscure. They can be open to multiple interpretations without being completely frustrating and elusive in their meaning.
That's Yeah, I mean, right. And so to be able to share these novels and in a certain sense be a champion for them to people who probably haven't read them, but to do that in a way that preserves that that mystery, I think is a great gift.
And that mystery, another way of putting it, is the wonder. I mean, that's an important part of any encounter with art, is a sense of wonder. And I think that as I read all of these novels, I often felt wonder. With, for example, a version of wonder, amazement at the quality of the writing, at the cleverness of what the authors were doing, at the beauty of the art itself, at the beauty of the form, and the the directions of the characters. I mean, that's wonder is an overrated experience or sentiment. And I was talking earlier about forms of knowledge that people embrace now. Wonder is an important, maybe a gateway to knowledge, or there's got to be better way of putting it than that. But it's a way of welcoming somebody into deeper knowledge, is by first creating a sense of wonder that makes them more curious to learn more, or to continue reading, or experience the artwork more deeply.
It's awesome. And then that's the challenge of the teacher, is to try to instill a sense of wonder.
Right.
Despite, sometimes these guys who are dead set on maybe perhaps sometimes not having that awaken because it's sixth period and I just have lunch and I got a lacrosse game this afternoon.
That's
and I don't
true.
feel like learning right now, sir.
Well, that's right.
But that's the challenge.
And I think that not to mention all the other distractions going on outside of class. It's harder to read novels now than it ever was, not because their novels are somehow less available now, but because so many other things are competing for our attention. But just you mentioned just now students reading novels and struggling to engage with them. I think we all had that experience, but that's why it's important to reread novels that you tried when you were younger and didn't like, but people keep telling you it's a good novel. Yeah, you may not. It's possible you just weren't ready for it.
Totally.
I mean, I know that's how it was in my experience. We all get smarter and we all learn more as we get older. And so even a novel you liked 20 years ago, you will like in a very different way now. Yeah, it's also true you might hate it now.
Yeah, that's right.
But Catcher in the Rye is a good example for me. I don't love that novel, but I understand it totally differently than I did in high school. And I have a much greater appreciation for it than I did with my initial reading of it.
Yeah. I mean, life changes you, so
yeah,
it changes your readings, for sure. Well, brilliant, and I'd love to just in conclusion, perhaps I really truly wish we could go through every single one of the books and all these amazing lessons, but just maybe a parting shot at the skeptical listener. I think I have some wonderful friends who have said things like, "Yeah, I just hate fiction," or I just can't do novels," or people who might really enjoy reading works of political philosophy or philosophy, theology, things that are more practical. But just if you were in a 2-minute elevator ride with one of these folks, very well-intentioned, good people, how would you win them over to this beautiful art form?
Well, first of all, I would point out that they probably love other forms of narrative, right? They probably like storytelling in general. They probably watch television, and they don't just watch the news. They probably watch, prestige drama on HBO or something on Disney and they probably love movies. These are narratives. Novels obviously are narratives too, and they are narratives that, because they are grounded in the written word, allow you to enter human minds in a way that no other narrative form can possibly do. That's why movie adaptations of novels tend to fall flat. Not always, but often. And it's because a novelist, I think the best example of this is a novel, George Eliot's Daniel Deronda, which I write about in my book. A great novelist enters a human mind, can trace the trains of thought, credible, fictional but credible and plausible ways of thinking that other people have. And that can help us develop skills of sympathy and sympathetic imagination. Doesn't mean our minds are changed and we think we suddenly agree with this sinister character, this character we disagreed with before, but we understand human thought more deeply. Things like political philosophy, nonfiction, I wouldn't discourage people from reading those things, but the great fiction offers you a different way of encountering language and understanding humanity than those works do.
Yeah. And there's something about it that sometimes it can change your mind in a way that an argument, because arguments obviously they're very important, but it is a gift to be able to enter the experience of another in a really deep way.
Yeah, and argument isn't the only form of persuasion. Storytelling is an important form of persuasion too. Argument is obviously important, but to win an argument, you want to win. You need to win hearts and minds. An argument gets the minds, and a great novel can get both.
Yeah.
A great novel, and the novels I write about here, deal with big ideas, but they do so in a way that never forgets the humanity behind those ideas. And I'm not sure that's always true of political philosophy.
Yes, right. Yeah, totally. Absolutely. And therein lies some of the great challenges that we face as a society. Ideas that disregard the individual, the human. I got to ask, have there been any books that have come out since you finished this one, or anything in the past year, any novels or any fiction that you really enjoyed and you said, gosh, it'd be cool to
nothing that's come out in the past year. There are a lot of novels I wanted to include that just I didn't have room for, but nothing published in the past year or so. There are a handful of 21st century novels that I seriously considered, like Marilyn Robinson's Gilead or Cormac McCarthy's The Road, and then a lot of much older books that I wanted to, if I could have done 20 novels, I would have included. But I haven't read. There's a novel from 2023 I mention in here in a footnote that I think is a fascinating novel called How I Won a Nobel Prize by, I think the author's name is Julian Taranto, and it's not I think conservatives will love this novel, but I wouldn't call it a conservative novel by any stretch of the imagination. But that's probably the most recent one that I would have that I included in here, albeit just in a footnote.
I love it. And those other, the Gilead and the other books in that series are marvelous. And The Road that's a book that's loved around here. That is a hard book to read.
It is, yeah.
It's a very, very tough book.
I chose Peace Like a River in part because I think it does things that both of those novels are doing. There's obviously an exploration of religious faith, which is what we get in Gilead. But then I think it's also a Cormac McCarthy-like novel in the way it's dealing with the West and that depiction of evil. But I mentioned this in my introduction. I've tried very hard to love Cormac McCarthy, and I can't. I appreciate him, or I respect him, but I don't love reading his novels. So I know a lot of people who think otherwise, but I would have felt like a phony devoting a chapter about him, knowing very well there are a lot of other people who would have had more fun writing that chapter.
Totally. No, yeah, it's gosh, if you want to hear a good, slightly heated discussion, bring him up in the faculty lunchroom. And you've got folks that absolutely love him, like top 3 books, and then others that have some issues with the way that he explains certain things. But someone who makes us think. We actually, one of our teachers taught a class on dystopian literature, and I think that was one of the books that they read in that class. So Ray Bradbury, a couple others.
My dystopian novel in 13 novels conservatives love is the P.D. James novel Children of Men from 1992. And it's a wonderful novel about basically what happens when people can no longer have children. So in the context of the novel, it's set in 2021, written in 1992. So it's kind of a look at a future where people can no longer reproduce. And it's not by choice, but birth rates are done. Now we're more in a voluntary state of declining birth rates. But one of the things the novel explores is what do we expect from our government when we have no hope for the future? And it's basically the growth of a totalitarian or authoritarian state, because all we want from government is comfort and security. We have no ambitions. There's no hope for the future, so we want comfort from the government. But then, unlike many dystopian novels, there's hope towards the end. And that novel also is replete with Christian imagery. Then it was adapted into a movie in, I think, 2006, 2007. And the movie's exciting, but kind of misses the point of the novel.
Interesting.
And omits all of the Christian imagery.
Interesting. Awesome. I hadn't heard of that one.
Yeah.
And I was about to say I'm going to put that on my list, but then no, this is my list.
Yeah, that's right. You don't need a list. You got the book.
It's already here with the introduction, so this is great. Well, beautiful. We are just deep lovers of the novel, and really are trying to give this to the next generation. But it's hard, as you mentioned, some of the attentional things. It's a loud world, phones, all the rest of it. Plus, I think it's just there's other competing art forms. So this is something that we care deeply about. I think this book is going to help us do this, and maybe even primarily, hopefully, through myself as a parent, the other parents here at the school. I know the best way for us to teach our kids to read is to read ourselves. And but we all need guides. So whether this is helping different book clubs or individuals put together a good reading list and then going through it, this is great. So thank you so much for your time, Chris, and thanks for this book.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was great talking to you. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And we'll have links to Dr. Scalia's bio page, as well as to this book, 13 Novels Conservatives Will Love but probably haven't read. So do get the book, and then do get reading. But that is all for this week, folks. Thank you so very much for listening. To support the work of our faculty as we try to share this love of reading with these boys here on campus, and we try to help you share this love of reading with other sons and students all over the United States, please do consider supporting the Heights financially. To do that, visit heightsforum.org. Click on support. Everything you do is incredibly, incredibly appreciated. While you're there, you can also learn more about the upcoming Teaching Essentials workshop in June and Convivium in November. So a lot of good stuff coming your way. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week. Lift high the cross of